from the Washington, D.C. area. It's the Inside Scoop, all the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton and I'm your host. And tonight we are going to be talking education. Everybody has now gotten themselves back to school for the last maybe week or so. I guess the colleges have been in it a little bit longer. And we're going to talk about higher education, which we've never done before. We've always done just Fairfax only. We are going to get to Fairfax in the second half of the show. But for the first half, we're going to talk about colleges and universities and some of the issues that are facing them. And I'm very pleased to say that we have an expert in that area. Oh, she's a lawyer. I shouldn't have called her an expert. It's okay. Okay, it's Naomi Harralson May, and she is with the Cooley Law Firm in the Washington, D.C. office. Cooley is a national law firm. It's got about 750 attorneys. It's got 11 U.S. offices and 1 office in China. And Naomi is an alumni of the oldest law school in the United States. Of course, we all know it as the College of William and Mary because it's in Virginia. She is licensed to practice in both California and in Washington, D.C., and she is a member of their higher education practice group. And she spent a lot of time, even before she became a lawyer, working in higher education issues at her alma mater and at other private colleges, dealt with investigations, dealt with accreditation, policies, standards, torts, you name it. She's got a wide spectrum of knowledge in this area. And so I'm very pleased to welcome you to the show, Naomi. This is your maiden voyage, so welcome aboard.
Thank you, Bettina.
Well, tell me a little bit about Cooley, because Cooley, I know, was started in the 1920s in San Francisco, but you're relatively a new arrival on the East Coast.
Yes, our DC office opened in the early 2000s, mostly to bring a regulatory presence to our practice. We partner with our clients on a variety of complex intellectual property, regulatory issues, litigation. We like to say that we often practice where innovation meets the law.
Okay, it's a good motto. A good motto. And Cooley gets named in, I see it in a lot of these lists as like the best place to work and things like that, which for a law firm is kind of hard to make those lists. They're not known as great places to work.
That's right. Fortune named us one of the top 100 places to work in 2014. The Financial Times has named us one of the 25 most innovative law firms. So that's just the beginning.
Excellent, excellent. Well, now the higher education practice, how big is that? Because that's where you are.
Yes, the higher education practice group is comprised of about 15 attorneys. And we also have a number of practice group professionals. They are individuals who have extensive experience, for example, as heads of accrediting agencies who have worked at the Department of Education in financial aid capacities. And we also have some tax attorneys who provide tax expertise.
Well, let me ask you on the accreditation, because you've mentioned that and you always hear about that.
Yes.
So what is that? Is there a government agency that accredits, or is it, like I know like the ABA accredits law schools. So how does that work with colleges and universities, and why is it important?
Sure. Accreditation has really morphed in its function in American society and higher education over the years. The early accreditors were founded primarily to answer the question of how do you define a college? What constitutes quality in education? There are a variety of different types of accrediting agencies. They're essentially voluntary peer membership organizations. So they are private associations, although courts tend to treat them as quasi-public entities because of their public function. So there are the big regional agencies, we call them the Big Six, that represent different areas of the country. There are national institutional accrediting agencies that represent certain types of institutions, such as career colleges. And then there are the specialized or programmatic agencies that represent specific disciplines, and things like schools of law, schools of psychology, schools of education. Accrediting agencies have really become increasingly important, though, since the Higher Education Act of 1965 and in the subsequent reauthorizations. The ability for students to receive federal loans and grants hinges on an institution's eligibility. And one of the criteria for eligibility is that the school is accredited by a federally recognized accreditor. So basically, accrediting agencies are known as gatekeepers for federal funds.
Okay, so that's the big hook there.
That is
for
the crux.
students to get loans, you've got to be accredited as an institution.
That's right.
Okay, and then I remember years ago, before things went digital, you had to have a certain amount of space in your library, and you had to have all of these kinds of standards. Have the standards evolved, or are they still back in the day when everything was in paper?
A little bit of both, actually.
Okay.
But really, the standards have evolved. And I would say about 10 years ago, the accreditors really woke up as Congress also began to realize that there was a tremendous amount of taxpayer money going to student loans. We're now at about $150 billion a year.
Oh, a year.
A year. In federal student financial aid. And as a result, there is increasing pressure on accrediting agencies from the Department of Education, and therefore accrediting agencies cracking down on institutions. Accrediting agency adverse actions have increased by 50% in just the last 2 years. So basically, schools are getting in more trouble than they used to because of accreditation. Their standards really have undergone a shift from more traditional inputs, such as the number of books in the library, the number of faculty who are credentialed, to more output and outcome measured standards.
Who gets a job
That's
evaluation?
Right. That's right. And those really reflect more of our current times, but they're also more subjective, so they also come with their own issues.
Well, let's talk about an issue that's come up on college campuses, and I know that there are some colleges in Virginia that are facing this kind of an investigation, and it's about the whole sexual assault issue on college campuses. There was an article this morning in the New York Times about,
Yes.
I think it's Florida State University.
Yes.
And it really talked about actually how the police were handling, or more accurately not handling,
That's right.
some of these assault cases. What are the colleges required to do? Because I know there's a big investigation. There are, I guess, a half a dozen or so of the universities in Virginia are being investigated. How did that all suddenly come to the fore? It's not like it hasn't been happening all along. What's causing this?
That's right. It's definitely a hot topic. I think that the reason that there's been an increase is really indicative of a larger trend. When we look at early American colleges, we see them taking what we might call an in loco parentis role, where they were much more involved in student life, and they regulated the, quote, morals of their students. By the time we reached the 70s, there were a number of lawsuits involving students, and courts basically said, reflecting again the times, that these students are adults. They should be treated like adults with all their privacy rights. They should be able to govern their own lives. Now, we've kind of seen the pendulum swing back in the other direction. So now we're seeing pressure from the Department of Education. The Office of Civil Rights has become very involved in investigating colleges for their compliance with Title IX of the Education Act of 1972, and basically that law prohibits sexual discrimination and different forms of sexual harassment. And the reason the Department of Education can have a say in this is because every time an institution becomes eligible and participates in federal financial aid, this is the little constitutional hook,
Right.
the institutions sign what we call a program participation agreement, saying that they will comply with the provisions of Title IX.
So the sexual assault issues are coming up under Title IX?
They are. They're actually coming up under multiple laws. The Office of Civil Rights, in conjunction with the Department of Justice, handles Title IX investigations and sometimes litigation. There's also the Clery Act, which is a law that governs the safety of campuses and requires institutions to report on crime and to disseminate those reports to the public. And there are basically a number of categories that they have to report. And those violations are primarily handled by the Department of Education. And we have seen fines of up to $35,000 for every infraction. So it's a very big potential for liability for institutions with respect to the department.
Well, is there a standard program that colleges and universities are being expected to adopt in the sexual assault area that says, if you get a report, here's what you have to do, or here's how you have to try and make the campuses safer? I know I've seen on some of the campuses, they've got these emergency call boxes in different places. Right. Is that all being dictated through the federal government as a way to try and minimize these problems?
There's definitely a legal floor. And I think this is where colleges sometimes get themselves into trouble, because there's legal compliance is one thing, checking the box. Right. The effectiveness of a policy is something entirely different. Generally, when I advise clients, the goal is to combine both. I mean, this is the reason why I went into higher education law in the first place. I saw that there was kind of a disconnect between the legal and academic and student affairs worlds, and I wanted to be able to find a way to bring those together. So when we're looking at institutional policies, there are certain things that the Department of Education requires. Some of it's regulatory, some of it's policy guidance. There are also certain things that are being considered in legislation right now. President Obama has made it a priority of his administration to conduct these investigations. There was a task force that he appointed, and they issued a report in April. They advised the institutions do certain things like climate surveys and implemented a lot more protections for students.
Interesting. Well, we are going to be back. We are going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk some more about sexual assault. We're going to finish that up. We're going to talk about student loan and debt. So stay with us, because we will be right back.
Around the world, 1 out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime, often by a family member or loved one. A future free from violence. It's all she's ever wished for.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America, and you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours. Choose to save.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton. I'm your host, and we are talking about higher education law in this segment, as we did the last segment. And we are very pleased to have with us Naomi Harralson May. She is with the law firm of Cooley LLP in the District of Columbia, and she knows her way around education law, specifically higher education law. And when we left, we were talking about sexual assaults on college campuses, an issue that nobody really likes to think about. But I want to ask you, Naomi, if you had a daughter, I guess a son as well, going to college, how do you know? Is there like a database of this school has this number of assaults, or a ranking? I mean, there are all those college rankings. Do they consider any of this stuff as part of the rankings? What would you advise parents and students to look for?
Sure, I would say two main things. One is part of the Clery Act requires institutions to disclose certain categories of crimes. So you are able to ask the institution if they don't voluntarily disclose it.
I was going to say, I don't recall ever seeing that on a website when I was looking at it for my sons. Okay.
Yes, that is absolutely required to be publicly available. So there should be somewhere where you can get it if it's not already online. It would divide out the different crimes, so you would be able to see sexual assault in particular. The new reporting provisions that go into effect next year also include other categories, including various types of sexual assault. So you're able to see that broken down even further. And again, the Title IX of the Education Act also requires that a person on campus be a designated person to handle Title IX issues. And so one thing would be to contact, probably through the Student Affairs Office, the person who's in charge of Title IX at the institution, and discuss with them what the procedures are and the processes in place, who to call, who the contacts are, and that would be, I think, probably the two places to start.
Now, do the institutions put this into like their orientation or something? Because I would think that would be something that you would want, particularly the freshmen, to be particularly aware of.
For sure. Generally, they are supposed to provide training, and in recent legislation as well as regulations, these obligations will probably be increased in the coming years, but it's definitely generally a part of most orientations at large schools.
Okay, well, so you ought to be able to find out. You probably need to ask.
You probably do.
But that's okay. Let's talk about student loans and tuition, because tuition, I saw the numbers just the other day for Virginia, one of the schools, and it's like a 5% increase in their tuition rate again. So what's driving these costs higher? Because at least some schools in Virginia spend, a lot of faculty are not full, what we would have considered like full professors, PhDs,
Correct.
in their subjects. A lot of adjuncts now.
Correct.
So what's driving the cost so high?
That is the big question. There's been a shift. It used to be that access was the big hot issue. Affordability has become the issue, especially with Congress. Senator Warner, as you might know, has been traveling to Virginia colleges talking about the costs. One of the factors, and this is a little bit ironic given what we just talked about, is the increased regulation. It is incredibly difficult for institutions to remain abreast of every regulation from accreditors, from the federal government, from the states. And it's not just the Department of Education, it's other agencies as well, because they often provide medical services, various other types of services that are affected by federal regulations. So that's one of the factors in college costs rising. Also, just with the recession, the most recent recession, generally enrollment runs in a counter-cyclical fashion when it comes to recessions, because more people tend to go to school when the economy is bad. That's right.
I know a lot of people getting graduate degrees suddenly, and I'm like,
that's right.
Okay, well, it's better than doing nothing and hanging out in your mother's basement or something. But,
well, it is.
But on the other hand,
it hasn't been that way in this past recession, and I think that's largely because of the huge increase in regulatory burden on colleges. I was just reading a Moody's report saying negative outlook again for higher education, and I think it's a misconception to think that institutions are somehow awash in cash. They are not. Their revenue barely keeps up with inflation. And the ability of institutions to maintain tuition at a steady level is tremendously challenging, especially because states are cutting back their funding. The amount of Pell Grants, for example, from the federal government, which are based on financial need, those are increasing, and it's difficult for institutions to make ends meet.
Well, when parents and students are looking at this, what do they need to know? Are there like online calculators that say, here's how much debt you should assume? Or if you're getting an English degree, here's how much debt you should take. If you're getting a technical, one of the STEM kind of degrees, maybe you take on more because your likelihood of getting employed is higher. Is there any kind of matrix out there like that? I can't believe the institutions would want it, but I would think some creative entrepreneur would have figured out a way to put all this together for people.
There's a proliferation of data out there.
And it's sorting it through and figuring out what you're looking at.
And the problem is that it's very difficult to generalize from any of the data that's out there. One good example of some efforts to make data readily available to consumers is the Obama administration's effort to implement the quote PERS system, which basically is the post.
I've never even heard of that.
It's a post-secondary database, essentially like you were talking about. But there's been a tremendous amount of controversy among everyone in higher education because the metrics are not so easy to put out there. For example, employment rates. Being able for institutions to be able to track down their graduates after they graduate. There's nothing that requires alumni to report back to the institutions about their earnings. In fact, many of them are very skittish about reporting anything like that.
The next call you're going to get is from the Alumni Association asking for money. Nobody's going to tell them.
That's right. And then the other issue is, all the efforts to connect student graduation information with, for example, IRS information or state tax information. Most people are incredibly concerned about privacy reasons, for obvious reasons. And so a lot of those metrics all depend on the self-reporting of students,
well, that's a
which
little
makes
unreliable.
them not so reliable. I know Senator Warner has introduced a bipartisan bill basically aiming to also do a similar type of public information system. And one of his main metrics is graduation rate, which is also part of the president's.
Well, I've heard a lot about that. I know when my younger son went to undergraduate school a number of years ago, I said to him at the time, listen, I am on the 4-year plan. I don't know what plan you're on, but at the end of 4 years, I'm done.
Right.
So you ought to be done then too. And he was, but I have a friend who really goes crazy on the graduation rates because so few people seem to get through on a 4-year, what we would have considered in the old days, so to speak, 4 years of college. You get in and out in 4 years. What's causing these rates to drop like that?
Well, part of the issue is that almost every institution reports a graduation rate that's exclusively confined to what they call first-time, full-time freshmen. So basically, the rates that you see published out there generally do not include transfers. They do not include what we call non-traditional students who come in with some college under their belt already. And so really the ability of a graduation rate metric to tell you anything substantive about the success of students is pretty limited. But we also see that there are issues with the PERS system that Obama is presenting, where people are talking about maybe some alternatives. How that actually plays out, we have yet to see.
Well, it all sounds sort of difficult to get this in any kind of realistic fashion, in a way that's usable for people to say, here's how much money I'm investing, what are we going to do? I want to talk just for a minute here, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, but one of my very favorite topics, of course, is UVA and the mess, the governance mess.
Yes.
Because I think so many people were shocked a year or so ago, year and a half ago, when all of a sudden, they fired the then president, and then there were all of these student protests, and then they suddenly hired her back, and now they've got this whole thing about raising money, and then of course a few weeks ago they had that thing come out about the people on the board of trustees, or visitors, I guess they're called. You can't have a dissenting opinion. You can't express it publicly. What is all of that? Does that happen everywhere, or is that just peculiar to UVA?
It's not peculiar to UVA. Institutional governance is one of the most fascinating issues with higher education to me. There are a lot of requirements of accreditors, of states, of the federal government that set broad outlines. But beyond that, institutions have very diverse governance structures. And I think that over time, we've seen kind of a pendulum again between boards that micromanage to presidents that basically run the whole ship. I don't think there's one perfect model for every institution, but I think what matters is that there's a process in place that's continually followed, that recognizes different lines of authority. There's clarity, that there are clear executive and legislative lines of authority, and even judicial for due process concerns. And that's something that institutions really have to think about before crises happen. It's something that there needs to be a lot of clarity about before there's any type of uprising, because once that happens, it's kind of too late.
Well, and that was one of the criticisms of UVA, was that once it started erupting, they didn't seem to know what to do about it.
Right.
And so I guess now they've got a whole system in place, and gag orders on their board of visitors and things like that. So we'll see what they do. But I want to thank you for coming out and spending time with us tonight. There's so many other issues in terms of online education and remote accessing education and all kinds of great things that we could continue talking about, but we are out of time. So we will have you back to talk some more higher education. And we're going to turn and talk Fairfax.
Our heroes shouldn't be homeless.
Yeah, right. Combat?
We need to do more for our vets.
Poor excuse for a mother.
Pathetic.
Shame on you, America.
Thank you for your service.
Why did you do that?
Because you serve too.
Improvised explosive devices do not gender discriminate. It's time for America to stop.
Mothers also raise their right hand and accept the risk of not returning home to their children. And sadly, some don't.
Women serve, fight, bleed, and die alongside their brothers. With tens of thousands of homeless women veterans in the U.S., they are in the biggest battle of their lives. Due to the lack of supportive housing services for women veterans with children, they are now the fastest growing homeless population in the U.S. America, we can do better. We owe it to them. And we owe it to them, our children. To do your part, please visit finalsaluteinc.org today.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton. I'm your host. And we are switching gears. We're still talking education, but now we are going to be talking about Fairfax County education. As regular viewers know, we talk about that a lot on this show in various ways, but tonight we have Kimberly Adams with us. She is the president of the Fairfax Education Association. She is a 15-year veteran in the education space. She was a librarian. She was an elementary school teacher. Now she is president of the union. And we're going to talk to her about that and some issues affecting people in Fairfax County. She also is a mother. She's got little kids. She's got tiny little kids, actually. So she's got a huge investment in making sure that the Fairfax County Public School system stays excellent, so that when her kids get there and get all the way through, it will be as good a system as it was in the past, which is a huge challenge. We've got a lot of children coming into the system and a lot of very diverse children coming into the system, and that's a big challenge for everybody. So I want to welcome you, Kimberly. This is also your maiden voyage.
Yes, ma'am.
So I want to talk to you about, you've been in the school system for a long time. First of all, why did you become president of the union? That can't be an easy job.
It's definitely not an easy job. It's something that I think my colleagues and I felt that it was the right time for me. I'd had quite a number of years in Fairfax County. I'd struggled along with some of them in as a building representative in our buildings, which we provide our members with the help that they need when they need it. So I've moved my way through the organization. I was part of our board of directors, and the time was right for me to become our president, become our leader.
All right, well, it is a huge area of transition. We've got a new superintendent. It's all sort of coming together. So we're going to talk about a lot of that tonight. One of the things that I wanted to chat with you on is something called the portrait of a student, or portrait of a graduate, I think is what it's technically called. Because, and I've got a, hopefully we've got a sort of a graphic of it that will show up on the screen. But tell me how this was developed, because I have heard some controversy about how it was developed. So what was the idea, what was the point of doing this portrait of a graduate thing?
Right, so the superintendent, Dr. Garza, really wanted something that would push our system farther and make us greater than we already were. And I think the portrait of a graduate will do just that for Fairfax County. So she put forward to a group of about 70 or more stakeholders, so parents, teachers, community members, staff from the administration, to develop this portrait of a graduate and what our students should look like with their 21st century skills. So with these members, actually, we did have a member from our board of directors who was part of that large committee to give input to this process. And the school board has taken this very seriously. This is what will drive the strategic plan for the county. And certainly, when a large group of stakeholders gets together, not everyone's opinion will make it onto the paper, and we have to take that in consideration. And then a lot of folks are interested in, how is this going to affect my child? How are we aiming to help all students succeed? Is this just the top of Fairfax County students, or are we making sure that every student in Fairfax County can be successful and look like a portrait of a graduate?
Well, one of the things, and we do have the graphic up, sort of shows you the little 5 different areas that we're going to talk about. But and it did say because I looked at the website, it says where a Fairfax County Public School graduate will engage in a lifelong pursuit of academic knowledge and interdisciplinary learning by being a communicator, collaborator, global citizen, creative and critical thinker, and goal-directed and resilient individual, which sort of sounded incredibly grandiose. And so what you just said about, does this take into account all of our different students? Or does it, as some people have said, really only reflects that upper tier of people who were born in this country, who have English as their primary language, who have middle class or higher economic level parents, because this does sound a little hoity-toity for the kid who maybe is from a home that doesn't speak English as a primary language, didn't come to school having gone to preschool, saying you want them to be a collaborator and global citizen and resilient and all this stuff. Sounds great, but the child can't read English, can't speak English, or is disabled, because we have a large number of children in the Fairfax County system that are disabled. How does this relate to any of those people?
Right, and I think that's what our education community, our teachers, our instructional assistants are interested in. How does this translate to all of our students? How do we take this into our classrooms, into our school communities? How do we develop plans for our school improvement? How do we ensure that every child is going to be successful? And are they figured into this portrait of a graduate? Does this portrait touch their lives, and can they see themselves reflected in it? And as they progress through their years of schooling, will they feel like they've been successful underneath this model?
Well, what kind of training, because you mentioned this with teachers, and my mother was a teacher, and I remember her doing lesson plans, and of course it was a much simpler time, but I look at some of these things and then I read this amazing, and you can find this thing, it's on the school board website, that gives you all these different ways that these 5 elements are going to be met. Are the teachers getting special training that says, here's how you make somebody a communicator, a global citizen? I don't think that anybody thought about making their students global citizens before. You wanted to make sure that they could think, they could analyze problems, they could reach reasonable solutions, if not a correct solution. I mean, I guess there's correct solutions in things like math, but maybe not in some of the softer sciences. I mean, what kind of training are the teachers getting for this stuff?
So we know that schooling these days isn't just reading, writing, and arithmetic. So we have to be more global thinking. We have to be more mindful of the collaborative processes. We have to be more mindful of how our students think and learn. So one of the things our association asked Dr. Garza is, what is this new instruction model going to look like? How is this going to affect our teachers in the classroom? What kind of initiatives are going to roll out, and what kind of training are we going to need? And she really reassured us that her idea is that this is already happening. We just needed to capture it and make it more stable of a model so that we could say, this is how we get there. Here's a measure that we're already using that shows we're teaching our students to be global thinking. We have a global awareness technology project in 5th grade that actually does show that, or showcase our students' ability to think globally. So, it's not that we're doing different work. We're going to be doing some of the same things we've always done, but we're going to be really focusing on how are we measuring students, how are we ensuring that we're getting to every student in the classroom.
Well, how do you? How are you going to measure that? These are not things, and there's a lot of criticism, of course, about the standards of learning, and we can talk about that too, but these are much squishier kinds of metrics. I mean, how are you going to do that?
These fall into the category of what we call authentic assessment. So right now we talk about SOLs, we talk about standardized tests that are bubble measures. Everyone takes the same test. When you're looking at an assessment that is more cumulative and you're looking at the child as a whole from beginning to end, you've got to look at how does that child do with this task? How did they do with previous tasks? Are they moving along a continuum? Are they learning? And it's not necessarily just a bubble in, did they answer the question? It's a more whole picture of the child. So authentic assessment.
Okay, I mean, that sounds really good. I really, would love that. Where are the teachers going to come up with the time to do an authentic assessment of every child in the classroom? Because we had, I read something that there are like 3,000 more children in the school system just this year. Where are the teachers going to come up with the time for this?
Right, and you know that Fairfax Education Association is very interested in the teacher workload and how the teacher workload affects their ability to reach every child, to differentiate instruction, to be the best teacher they can be every day. And we've seen with the workload that they've had in the past, the inability to sometimes get everything done that they needed to. And if we do add more to their plate, what are we sort of taking away? What are we going to move away from and move towards? So we're definitely interested in that, because how does a teacher, function with a classroom average of about 29 students in elementary school now, and more than that in the middle and high school, and how do they make sure that every child is getting the learning that they need and being able to be successful by the end of a course?
Well, how do they do that? Because I sort of look at this and say, if everybody was the same, so, the student at the front end of your alphabet is the same as the student at the end of your alphabet, and so everybody's at the same learning levels with the same history of preschool and the same reading ability. And you always have, regardless, you always have fluctuation, because there's some kid who was learning French at 3 or something. But, in general, there used to be a fairly narrow band, but now we have children all over the spectrum. So it just strikes me as an enormous additional burden on teachers to do this. And I'm always highly skeptical, and I think this does come from my mother having been a teacher. I'm always highly skeptical when the school administration adds something and tells, says they're going to compensate over here, you're going to get more help, or this task will be offloaded. I mean, how realistic is that in this budget environment? You can't go out, the school system isn't going to go out and hire aides for all the teachers or something.
And of course, we've seen tens of thousands of students added over the last 10 years. And over just the last 5 years, we've lost more than 1,000 positions. So you're right, we are stretched to the max and trying to do everything we do with less every day. I don't think that, the school system has to very much weigh, is this the right time to do something new? And we always are very skeptical of new initiatives and when they come and how they're handed down. And are teachers being asked to really put their thought and their time into it, or is it something that's being mandated from above? And I think that's part of it. When a teacher is treated like a professional, when a teacher is asked, what do you think about this? How does this affect your work? Because you've been doing the work. Then we might be getting closer to what we need to see. What the FEA is interested in is, how are our teachers being included in the process?
Well, how are they being included? You had a 70-person thing with community, and then the school system sort of took it over and made some tweaks to it. How involved are the students, are the teachers?
Well, and we do have a lot of programs that teachers are involved in, particularly in the summer when it's a little easier to be less with your students and more in a professional environment, to develop some of these things. And I know that over the summer we do have a lot of curriculum writers and a lot of people who come directly out of their classrooms to do this type of work. And some of it is actually being done now, because we didn't have the luxury of the summer with the SOL changes for particularly 3rd grade. I know there's a lot of teachers who've been tapped to come in and work on how are we going to set this up for our new 3rd grade assessments, because 3rd grade now has one less SOL, and how are we going to get some authentic assessment around that?
Wow. Stay with us, because we are going to come back and talk about some more Fairfax County issues. Who knew there were so many things to discuss? We'll be right back.
This is firstgov.gov, where we're obsessed with getting you government information.
Brand new student loan applications on the site, baby. This calls for a celebration. Where's your uncle?
So in the end, it was either take the astronaut gig or come work here. What can I say? Duty called.
Dude, that's my cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that's Sam's cop.
Oh, sorry?
Yeah. No. Sam's. No.
Just log on or email us and get what you need.
C, change of address form. That's how it's done. D, driver's license renewal.
E, emailing Social Security information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice, we'll allow it. All right, Ed. What are those?
Government surplus cars for auction.
You posted those online last time.
No, you did.
I'm posting them online this time!
For all your government information, firstgov.gov.
Oh, what have we got here? Sometimes you feel tired. You can't seem to lose those extra pounds off your midsection. And your joints hurt when you take the stairs. Well, you're getting older. But I'm happy to say that there's some simple things we can do to keep you happy and healthy for years to come. We can also lower your risk for some serious diseases the older population is often subject to. Proper nutrition is more important than ever. Your body has changed, you know. Not as many treats. A basic exercise plan, lots of walks and fresh air, and most importantly, come and see me for twice-yearly checkups to help ensure the best possible quality of life. Now, how does that sound? Good boy.
Improve the quality of life for your elderly pet. Schedule twice-yearly checkups that include preventive care and regular lab work. A message from the veterinary members of the American Animal Hospital Association.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host, and we have Kimberly Adams with us. She is the president of the Fairfax Education Association, and we're talking about Fairfax County Public Schools. And before we went to break, you made a reference to there being one fewer SOL in the 3rd grade. Now, were there a number of changes in the SOL, or is that just the only one?
Right. In grades 3 through 8 in the this current school year, there will be 5 fewer SOL tests.
Why?
Yes, because the state legislature voted to eliminate some of those and sent it on to the State Board of Education to figure out how to make that happen so that our students are under less stress. And a lot of it has to do with these measures just being too many all in a row every year.
Well, there is that teaching to the test criticism and the notion that our kids just are constantly being tested over and over again. So this was just a big, we'll get rid of 5 of them and State Board of Election, you figure it out?
Right, and when the State Board of Education has to work on this, they're actually involving stakeholders. So they've come and they've talked with school jurisdictions. They were in Bristol, Virginia recently. They've been in Fairfax County. They're actually here now, and we'll be meeting with them tomorrow, some of the leaders of our local associations in Arlington and Prince William and Fairfax and Loudoun to try and make our position known on what should the alternative assessments look like, what's going to be different in this school year.
Okay, well, we're going to have authentic assessments is my answer.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about teacher workload. You all did, the FEA did this lovely report, and it's really kind of shocking when you read it and you realize how much extra time above and beyond what the teachers are being paid for that the teachers are working. So what are some of your recommendations? What are you suggesting the school system do?
Well, a lot of the work that a teacher does is during the school day, but there's a significant amount of work that's done outside the school day. What we've worked with the superintendent and administration this year on is figuring more of our collaborative time during the day so that teachers aren't asked to come in hours before or hours after school to meet in teams. They can get some of that work done during their working hours. So particularly with full day Mondays, we've had a lot of that time met by our specialists, so teachers who teach music, art, or physical education, teachers who teach FLES or foreign language in the elementary schools, librarians, guidance counselors, and other support staff are able to take the children from the classroom teacher so the classroom teacher can work with other classroom teachers to really design that instruction, determine which students might need help, figure out the lessons that are going to be most beneficial to what's missing or what hasn't been taught or what needs to be taught for those students. So the collaborative learning time was something that we really figured into the report and how that was going to be taken care of. Another thing that we talked about in the report really was how the meetings that principals hold happen. A lot of schools, those meetings were on the Monday. So now in an elementary school, you've got to figure where is that going to happen. And we've helped the school system to figure out regulations so that teachers are only required to meet monthly for up to 2 times a month for no more than 1 hour. So a total of 2 hours outside their contract by mandate. So the principal can only call that much time from them and require that you're there and that you get childcare for your own student or make sure that someone is being taken care of wherever you needed to be after school or before school.
Wow, I had no idea that those kinds of meetings were actually outside the contract time. So
and your back to school nights are all off of contract time.
Are they
Conferences are mostly off of contract time, particularly this year where we've restructured the school day on Monday. Now we have our teacher work days and one of them falls during conference time. So they actually have limited some of the time that teachers had to have those conferences and they're forcing it more either during teacher time, during the school day, when parents who can meet can come in. And then a lot of parents are not going to make it until before before or after school. So teachers will have that time as well to meet with parents.
Wow. Well, that is true. And I know a lot of people say, oh, but the teachers, they don't work that hard anyway. They're only there 7.5 hours a day. And I work more than that. And I tend to think, yeah, but you're not trying to keep control over 29 kids. I think that's a different level of stress that you're under. So just my own view. But let me ask you something else, because the other thing that I read about teacher workload and how it just keeps getting bigger and bigger as these different requirements come in. Yep. And that our teachers' salaries in Fairfax, we used to pay a good amount. You'd see the
lead the region.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now I've heard that we don't.
We don't. We fall about 5th. We're hoping to be 4th.
How many are we measuring? Are we 5 out of 5 or 5 out of 6?
We're measuring against about 9 jurisdictions. So as far south as Stafford and as far to the west as Loudoun and
those are hardly
Winchester.
Those are not really comparable.
Well, you've got Arlington County, Alexandria, Falls Church. Right. We do go across the river to Montgomery County to pull that statistic, Loudoun and Prince William. So the big ones that we're comparing ourselves with, we do fall 5th.
Wow. Okay, so what's the effect of that? Are we losing teachers? Is this?
Yes, and we're trying to pull the statistics in our association. It's hard to do because a lot of people don't give an exit interview when they leave the system. The system doesn't follow up necessarily if you don't provide the exit interview or participate in it. They don't chase you down to get your exit information. But we are hearing from a lot of our members, oh, I moved to Arlington. Oh, I moved to Loudoun. I can either afford a house in Loudoun and the pay is about the same or a little higher, or I can move to Arlington where the pay is almost $10,000 more. And I still live in my home in Fairfax. So it is a significant issue. And you're not losing last year's new teacher, you're losing the 5 to 10 year experienced teachers. So we've invested in their training, we've invested in making them the best teachers in Fairfax County. They're the reason we are world class, and we're losing them to surrounding jurisdictions.
Is there any hope for getting that fixed? $10,000 is a huge gap.
It is a huge gap, and that's about mid-career. That's about a 15-year veteran teacher with a master's degree. So Fairfax is working on how does our pay scale compare? How do we, try to gap that? How do we make it a little faster to get to that higher level? So compressing the scale may be an issue. Dr. Garza's committed to getting us back to the top of the region within 5 years. So we're hopeful that that can happen. This year we got a step increase, but it was delayed until November. So we won't see an increase in our pay for a couple of months. Employees not on a teacher scale were actually delayed 4 months in the implementation of their new pay raise.
Now, what did they use? Because the school system, first of all, I always plead poverty, which I think they've lost an enormous amount of credibility in the budgeting context, because they always say we have no money, we're running out of money, and then they end up with money left over. And as I recall it, we had close to $40 million left over. So why did these raises have to be delayed? What did we do with the extra money this year?
Right, well, some of the money is actually what's considered undelivered materials, so schools that have made purchases at the end of the fiscal year but they hadn't actually been received yet. That's part of that. Then they did use some of that money to fund the full day Mondays, about $7 million for the full day Monday. And then there were some other expenditures that they needed to make at the end of the year. So I think they're finishing up with about $29 million that they're holding, and they're going to push that forward to next year. Typically what they do is they end up with a reserve and they push it forward as carryover for the next school year. So it actually is a beginning balance when we get to the end of the school year. They push it forward as a beginning balance. That is typically less than 1.2% of the full budget. So you're not dealing with a huge, 50% unspent money. No, this is a 1%, 1.2% of the budget is unspent. In a $2.2 billion budget, to have less than $30 million sitting around and waiting for next year is not a significant amount. It's less than 1 month's payroll.
Wow, that actually sounds improved. If something goes wrong,
you need to make sure you've got some months on hand. When you run a business, 6 months cash on hand to handle any problems, right? The school system isn't running that way, nor is Fairfax County itself.
Right. I was going to say.
Yeah, the money doesn't come from the school board. The money comes from the Board of Supervisors.
Now, where do we then get our new teachers from? If we're not competitive price-wise, why would a brand new teacher come to Fairfax? Is it because we do great training and it's a great reputation, it's easier to jump someplace else?
Well, and that is part of it. When we recruit teachers other places, we really are talking to new young teachers. This is going to be their first job for some of them. Fairfax County is world renowned, and if they hear it and they see what we have to offer and they want to be part of that, they do come here. And it's usually not until they get here and they're within their first couple of months of school that they realize how truly challenging it can be to live in Fairfax County, even just to afford rent in Fairfax County. A lot of our teachers don't live in Fairfax County.
I thought a lot of them did not live in the county, and then you've got the huge commuting aspect.
And beyond our teachers, a lot of the members of the Fairfax Education Association are food service workers, bus drivers, people who work in our buildings, so building maintenance. A lot of them do not live within Fairfax County. So you've got a huge commute for those folks as well.
Well, that's got to be a huge shock when you come here from some other place and you realize, oh my gosh, I thought I was making all this money and I can't even live in the place where I'm teaching. Let's talk about technology, because I know you've got something of a background in education.
I do a little
technology. And one of the things that we heard about, I think it was last year, was they tried to introduce an electronic, I think it was a math book or something. It did not go well. How is Fairfax doing? People call it a digital divide, because we do have such a variance. If you're going to the schools in the Langley Pyramid Cluster Group, whatever they call them these days, you're likely to have internet at home and access to a computer, but if you are one of the folks down in, for example, the Mount Vernon area, that may not be true. What's Fairfax doing for that?
Yeah, well, we did roll out an online textbook in a number of subjects. Math was one of them, social studies was another. And the students who have access at home very easily can get to the textbook. The homework that might be assigned in conjunction with the textbook is easy to get to. When we have students who don't have a computer at home, or maybe they have a computer at home, but there's 4 children in their family. So some of the issues along the lines of the digital divide come into play when we have families who don't have what they need at home to help their students get access. If you don't have a printer, how do you print the homework? So things like that. And the Access for All program that Fairfax County does participate in can provide internet for families who need it, but not everyone has the knowledge to find that or has been told you can get this special program for your students at home to have reduced cost internet access. But then you do need to have the technology. A lot of us have our smartphones, but can you really read a textbook on the smartphone?
No.
Not really.
Not a textbook. I mean, that would be a little bit much.
And they're not all designed to display like you would expect a book to display from Amazon or such. It's designed to be on a laptop or on a computer screen.
Yeah, that's a little bit crazy. Let's, in our last 30 seconds here, Bailey's Elementary, is that the future, the vertical 5-story elementary school?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's an amazing space. I haven't personally been inside of it, but I've watched all the virtual tours, which you can view online, and it's pretty interesting to see what our kids are being exposed to, the new teaching models, the way teachers use space. It's amazing.
Well, I want to thank you, Kimberly, for taking time out. I know you had to schlep across the county to get here, and you're extremely busy with the Fairfax education issues that you're dealing with. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And we will be back actually next week. So I will see you all then.